Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Kingman. I'm the Executive Director of the Learning by Giving Foundation.
Hi, Amy, and I am Wayne Green. I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Teen Funders Network based here in New York. And Amy, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about Learning by Giving?
Sure. So Learning by Giving exists to inspire and train a new generation of leaders to effectively distribute capital back into their communities. And what that actually looks like is funding and providing a platform for high school and college students to engage in experiential philanthropy. So we have about 35 classes at everything from community colleges to Ivy League schools across the country, where diverse groups of young people come together as a part of an accredited course and go through sort of that beautiful but challenging process of where and how they want to direct resources. They do things that many foundations and many philanthropists do. They start by educating themselves on the community where they're living, where their school is. What are some of the social and economic issues that arise? They narrow down an area of focus. They explore and get to know the nonprofit organizations working towards their impact area. And they visit them, they do due diligence on the organizational structure, and ultimately at the end, they make that incredibly difficult yet collective decision as to where to direct typically about a $10,000 grant. And I think for the people who are taking the Launchpad course, that's incredibly relevant because, again, at the end, it's that group decision making. And I know you and I are going to dive a little bit into that during our conversation, sort of the challenges to that, the great assets to it, and what it looks like in our organizations. But why don't you also tell everybody a little bit about Jewish Teen Funders Network?
Sure. So the Jewish Teen Funders Network is an organization that is based here in New York. We are a network organization, which means that we support teen philanthropy programs that exist throughout the country. We have programs in North America, Canada, Israel, and Australia. And we work to provide resources, training, materials, tools to the professionals to work with teams. We have roughly about 110 teen philanthropy programs that exist within our network. And they service thousands of teens each year in the programs. The programs, similar to what you described, Amy, in terms of, it is a group of teens that come from diverse backgrounds, economic, geographic, Jewish affiliation, Jewish identity, to really come together to think about how do we learn about philanthropy, what does philanthropy do, and how can we use philanthropy to affect change. Obviously, the organization is Jewish, and so the work that we do is really guided through our Jewish values, and it's really important for teens to understand, what is their identity in giving, how do they learn about the issue areas that they face, what does Judaism say about those issues, and how do they think about learning about nonprofits, how do they go do site visits, and how do they fundraise and then allocate funds out to issues that they care about. And so the teens really work together to identify a particular issue area, whether it is domestic violence or racism or LGBTQ rights. They really learn about that topic in depth and then think about how organizations are supporting that and where are those funds that they can give out to those organizations to address those issues.
And we should also just let the listeners know, like Wayne and I were just chatting about this. We're having this conversation it's June 1st. So the midst of both the COVID-19 global pandemic, as well as sort of the heels of a weekend of incredible protests and some unrest around our country around issues of police brutality and racial injustice. So we are both sort of spinning a little bit, but glad to have the space to talk a little bit about young people engaging in social change and what we're seeing. Wayne, I would love to know a little bit about what are some ways in which you feel like your young people engage in philanthropy or show up in philanthropy maybe a little bit differently than their parents or grandparents or sort of more traditional philanthropic spaces do?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the way that teens today think about philanthropy, I think we're in a time where teens grew up with mobile phones. They grew up with access to information and understanding. And so even just you mentioning about what's happened this weekend, teens throughout the country and around the world are seeing this live. They're the ones also who are there, present, watching and participating. And so I think teens today are more accessible in understanding these big issues, these big universal issues that are happening. And so what I think some of probably our parents and grandparents kind of, and may have picked some of the old institutions that they thought about supporting or funding. I think teens today are really thinking about these big universal issues, racism and climate change. And I don't know that those are necessarily, not to say they were not thought of decades ago, but they're really on the forefront of what teens are thinking about today. I mean, I even think about gun violence in this country. That's a particular issue area that I know our teens have been grappling with, and thinking about how do they support and how do they address that in this country. And so, you know, it is about them coming to the table with this myriad of these issues and then thinking about, of all these things, how do I even think about what I support? How do I address it? And for us as an organization, it's like, okay, we have these big universal issues. How do we distill them down to be something that is tangible and something that we can actually be concrete in learning about, and then supporting and then funding ultimately. And I think that's similar to, you know, you work primarily with college age teens, and you're like that, just that next step ahead of us, well, after us. So, you know, I'm also curious, what do you see with the college students, or how does that work?
So really similar things. I think millennials and Gen Zers are really intrigued by systems philanthropy and are much more sort of connected to, critical of, curious about how our systems contribute to a lot of these social problems. And in that, also much more critical of philanthropy in general, right? And sort of why does it need to exist, and what are the gaps in sort of our social service programs and within the power structures of this country that make philanthropy so necessary. So all of that is incredibly amazing and incredibly challenging for a number of reasons, right? Like, we want our young people to grapple with the dark side of philanthropy, but also not to just be stone throwers, right? Who decide that everything is wrong. And so therefore there's no, you know, sort of point in engaging and trying to make things better. And so getting them there, to typically Learning by Giving is taught over a course of a semester. So getting through that process, right, is challenging. And also because young people and young adults are often looking for that instant gratification, right? They want to just like figure out what to do. So what do I do now? You know what I mean? Quickly, let's move on. And spending the time really focusing on sort of the ecosystem of philanthropy, spending the time really getting to understand their community, and also sort of understanding that there's a grant is a symptom of a process, but there's no end, right, to your own sort of like philanthropic journey and journey as a social justice warrior, or whatever term you might use. And so I think getting sort of young people to really dig into the messiness, to grapple with it, to come out at a place where they're able to make decisions about how resources will be allocated, but then also to kind of go right back into that cycle. Our faculty, I mean, both of us work primarily with educators who work with these young people. So our 40 or so faculty are just absolutely heroes in my mind for working through that with young people. And then the other thing that I mean, there's a number of ways in which I think they give differently, definitely more of a systems focus, and a lot more really important and wonderful questions about community representation at the nonprofit level. So whether it's through board representation, staff representation, and also like how community input is sort of like solicited and integrated, and all of that are definitely things young people are coming to the table asking. And just even, I mean, frankly, for me, it took me many years before I really started to understand the importance of those things.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things that you mentioned, and I was just thinking as you're talking, was this idea of journey. And I think that is so critical to what we do with the work. with teens and how we provide the education to the professionals who then work with teens. This idea of a journey, I think that philanthropy is absolutely a journey. And I think no matter whether you're working with teens or college students or adults or grandparents, it's a journey. This is not just you do once and then you're done. You know, whether you're joining a giving circle or a teen philanthropy program or a college program, there's this understanding about this cycle that is needed in philanthropy. It's about understanding the issue area. It's about understanding what you care about, what are you passionate about, and how do you think about making change by using money. You know, people can go out and, you know, right now I think, you know, standing and protesting and standing up for what is wrong, you know, doing volunteering. Philanthropy is another tool that gets used to affect change. And I think for us in the work that we do, I feel very privileged that we get to work with these young minds where we really have a chance to really help them to think about what is the opportunities that they have throughout their life and to start as young as possible. And so this journey is about where they start, but it's not, you know, you don't end. This is a cycle. You provide funding and then you evaluate and then you come back. And there's another issue that might come up and something else that might be more important, and how do you fund that? And so I think, you know, that is something that I feel is so prevalent no matter what stage you're at, and whether it's a giving circle or a teen program.
And I think, like, just on that same vein, right? Like, for all of our young people, as well as the people who are participating in this launchpad and who are thinking about starting a giving circle, like, there are two things that I think are so amazing about that. One, like, they're deciding to use monetary resources to affect change, right? Like, they have made that decision. Yes. I can't tell you how many times I hear, you know, people say, like, well, I don't give money, right? But I give other things. Well, money is also, right, an incredibly important resource to affect social change, to disrupt power, all of those things. And so I think that's a real important thing to say. And then the other thing is that they're choosing to do it collectively.
Yeah.
And you and I were talking a little bit before about how beautiful that is, and also how challenging it can be, right? I mean, it's the easiest thing for me to do is decide what I care about and go give money to it. In that, probably they're grateful to have the money. Probably no one is challenging my thinking. Nobody's challenging me to consider, right, like, other options. But even more importantly, nobody's challenging me to sort of visit my own biases and personal sort of history and relationship to whatever these social issues are. And so we've had some great conversations in the past about just, like, the beauty of that collective. And I'm just curious, like, do you have things that someone's about to embark on in a collective giving effort, like things that you think are important for them to think about? Or
well, I love that you just said, and you captured it so well, this idea of these challenges that we face. I think by doing it as a collective, you are challenged to think about where you give. You know, you may still give to that entity or that particular issue, but it makes you think about what are some of the other issues that there are, and hearing from one another about what things they care about, and how do you then collectively decide to work on one particular or two particular issues. And I think that's the thing that happens with our teams, is that, you know, you often in the groups of teens where we work with, there's like sometimes 20, 25 teens who are all coming from different perspectives, and they all think about different things, and how do they collectively decide on one or at the most two issues that they're going to address. And for us in our programs, it's very much about consensus building. It's not about voting, because we want people to have that respectful dialogue. And I think that is a skill and a challenge that happens no matter, again, whether it's teens or adults. It is about listening and hearing other people's perspectives on giving, on issues, on things that are important. And I think that is a challenge that we're constantly facing, and a skill that we're trying to encourage teens to build up in terms of being respectful and hearing opinions of others, because that permeates not just philanthropy, but it permeates all the things that happen in society.
Right. It's like that muscle of consensus building, respectful disagreement, all of that. Like, it is again, philanthropy is particularly collective giving, a place where you can build that muscle, but it shows up, and hopefully, right, does show up in so many parts of your life, whether it's through friendships and partnerships or politics or civic engagement. So it's one of the things, that we talk about a lot with our young people, which is the importance of being process oriented and not outcomes oriented, right? That if you're going into this, and I think this absolutely applies to anybody who's going to do some collective giving efforts, if you're going in sort of hyper focused on the outcome that you want to give to so-and-so organization, and you want to just make sure they have more money, and by doing it collectively, you'll have access to more money, you're probably going to be pretty disappointed, right?
I think you're going to miss the whole journey.
Yes. Yeah. But if you go into it knowing that the process is actually the gift, for you and for others, I think that you'll get so much more out of it. We have that wonderful saying that our faculty say to students at the beginning of the semester, at the end of this, I cannot and I won't promise that you will be happy with the outcome. Our commitment to each other is that you'll be satisfied with our process.
Correct.
And I think it's just a great way to capture what collective giving, the fabric of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same thing that I think happens with teens. We say to them that in the end, you may not be happy with the actual organization that you're giving to, but that process that you've gone through, that your giving is still making a really important impact, even if it wasn't by design your particular issue that you started the process with. And I think regardless of, again, teens, adults, college students, the importance of collective giving, I think, helps to get a greater understanding of issues that there are, and also, again, this issue of how does philanthropy become more impactful. I think you asked the question right at the beginning about what's the difference between teens and older adults. I think even for me growing up, and sometimes with teens, there's this idea that it was really the mega wealthy, that those are the philanthropists. Those are the ones that are making change. But I completely think today, and in the work that I do, that the teens and the individuals who come together, that's the true essence of philanthropy. Those are the philanthropists. It doesn't matter about giving away $1 million or $18. It's about how you do it in a strategic way that I think is about what it means to be a philanthropist.
Yeah. And I think young people and everybody, but especially people who are choosing to engage in this collectively are really thinking about how to do it as a true partner to nonprofit organizations and to community, right? And to realize that money is an asset that some people bring to the table, but personal experience, lived experience, perspective, education, all of those things are also assets, and that money, right, shouldn't have this unnatural or sort of unfair power in that decision-making process. And I think by engaging in it in a less of a transactionary relationship and more of sort of a process-oriented and group collective process will make the people in Launchpad and other collective giving spaces see that much more authentically, because you can't, by sort of the nature of being a part of a group with people of different perspectives, educational backgrounds, lived experiences, not begin to see what an asset all of those things are.
So we were just talking before, Amy, about what is the core foundation of how college students come together. And I was thinking about, what is the ways that we can bring giving circles together, teens, when they come from such different perspectives, how do they align together in doing this work?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. It's such an important thing to think about when you are embarking on a collective giving effort. And one thing that all of our classes do is at the very beginning of their process, they come up with, discuss, write down, and then sort of put up on the wall a list of rules of engagement or sort of ethical decision-making behaviors that they will engage in. And when they do that, again, that discussion is really important. What kind of community do we want to create? What kind of community do we want to exist in? It's really important to do that process, but it's also a great tool when there are times where philanthropy can feel, and decision-making can feel so personal, right? You and I were talking about what happens in a collective decision-making process when you may not want to give to the domestic violence organization, yet maybe I'm a survivor, and by going through that debate with you, I am personalizing, right, and feeling like you're discounting kind of my experience. So having those rules of engagement and sort of that covenant of behaviors as a group really, really, really helps when things can get sticky. And because there isn't in a collective process really one person in charge, it also gives everybody sort of shared accountability for keeping the values and behaviors and norms in the group sort of to the agreement. So it's a really good thing, I think, for collective giving circles or groups to do at the beginning. Do your teens do stuff like that?
Yeah, so, you know, it's interesting. When you were saying it, it's, you know, we are guided by Jewish values, which ultimately are universal values that we all hold to, whether it's something like hope or preservation or justice. You know, we think about what are the values that guide us in terms of where we will give. And I also think it guides you in the process too, right? You can, you know, when you come to a meeting or you come to a session, and if you've selected hope for, you know, what you're ultimately going to be giving to, you know, how are you bringing hope in every single one of those sessions? You know, this weekend that we've just had was really difficult, but I maintained hope that we will become a better society by what's happening. And, you know, in the COVID crisis, I have hope that we will find a vaccine and we will get better, and we will find a space where we can actually also appreciate some of the things that have come out of what's happened during this time. And so I think there's ways that you can embody the values, not just in terms of guiding your giving, but also embody how you behave and you interact within the space of your giving.
And it helps, right? Like make sure that anybody who's at the decision-making seat in philanthropy is not holding nonprofit organizations or community-based organizations to a value set that they themselves aren't practicing. So sort of having that synchronicity, I think, between all of that is hugely important.
Yeah, I agree. So I know this has been fun. I love seeing you on camera, and I'm sad that we don't get to do this. We didn't actually get to do this in person. We actually we're meant to have some coffee together, but we will make sure that we get to do that.
Shoot, I forgot coffee.
I know. We have to make sure that we get that when we meet in person.
Is there anything we want to say to the Launchpad people before we close? Anything else?
I would just say that you're in for an incredible journey, and I am thrilled to be part of this. I love the work that I get to do, and feel very privileged and full of gratitude that I get to teach teens about philanthropy, and get to be in this space where I truly believe that we are making important changes to society and the world in which we live.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Like, brava to you for starting this journey. You're going to learn so much about giving. You're going to learn even more probably about yourself. And we're definitely cheering for all of you.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you.
See you again soon.
See you soon.